by 1983, as a result of putting together all this work and reading all these different perspectives, that's when I concluded, but could not say, absolutely could not say to anybody that climate change was going to destroy habitat for humans on the planet in the not too distant future. And at that time I thought we wouldn't make it until 2030. There's nothing, there's no single bit of evidence pointing to that. There's no significant overall study that says that's what's going to happen. Certainly not in 2003. But that's the conclusion I reached. I couldn't speak about it without fear of getting my career chopped off. I mean, my head chopped off. And so I didn't until 2007. And then I started talking about it more openly, and that didn't go well. And that ultimately led to my departing the University of Arizona voluntarily, by the way, in 2009, May 1st, 2009. So that's the story so far. After I left the University of Arizona, I became better known for my work on abrupt, irreversible climate change. And because of that work on abrupt, irreversible climate change, I was deplatformed with a coordinated defamation campaign that almost certainly was rooted in the United States surveillance security network, we'll say. And that led to my being completely disappeared. It's about 5 years ago that defamation campaign peaked and made me persona non grata, unable to speak on tour since then or reach a significant number of people. It's interesting because years later, 2018 and 2019, the IPCC, one of the more conservative bodies in the history of the planet, one of the more political bodies operating under the auspices of being a scientific panel, concluded that climate change is abrupt and irreversible. And as nearly as I can tell, nobody working on behalf of the IPCC has been called a sexual predator and had their public life completely destroyed. I reached the conclusion a little bit sooner than they did. As Robert Heinlein, the science fiction writer from the United States, who wrote something like, being right too soon is socially inconvenient, something like that. And so I reached this conclusion, began speaking and writing about this conclusion that we had entered the arena of abrupt, irreversible climate change that threatened habitat for our species on this planet. I reached that conclusion in 2003. I was talking about it quite openly not so long after that. And then years later, along comes the IPCC and concludes the same thing, and nobody wants to destroy their lives. Nobody is reaching out to anybody working on those reports for the IPCC and calling them sexual predators. Nobody is reaching those people and saying, no, that can't possibly be right because I have too much convenience in my life to lose if it is. Yet when I was talking about, when I reached that conclusion many years before the IPCC did, I was the worst person on the planet. You know, it's interesting. Michael Mann concluded in a paper in Nature in 1999 that we had entered the arena of abrupt climate change, and that's what was headed. That's where the hockey stick idea came from. And several years later, he had a child. Well, his wife had a child. So he's the father of a child in any event. How could you reach that conclusion that we're headed for this abrupt climate change and not also conclude that that's going to have consequences for human beings on this planet? How could you reach that conclusion and then go having children? Maybe it has to do with the fact that Michael Mann has degrees in applied math, physics, geology, and geophysics. Maybe that's why. Because if you don't understand the first thing about conservation biology, about the pillars of conservation biology, speciation, extinction, and habitat, maybe you decide that humans are so good we can do anything, that we can survive anything, that we can literally do anything. Maybe that's the conclusion you reach. Maybe that's why you have children at a relatively late age, knowing for years that we have entered the arena of the hockey stick of very abrupt climate change. I don't know. It's crazy. Seems crazy to me. And that's what I've been called. My ideas have been called crazy by James Hansen, and I've been called crazy and way worse by Michael Mann.
Guy McPherson is very pessimistic about humans surviving even 10 more years on the planet. What do you think?
I think that's crazy. You can't kill people that easily.
The transition from range science to conservation biology for me was relatively straightforward because I was in this graduate program that had a bunch of conservation biologists in it. Nobody called themselves that because nobody was using that term, or at least very few people were using that term, conservation biology, conservation biologist. So people were not using that term to describe themselves, and I certainly wasn't either. But I was working with people who were interested in the natural world, who were interested in conserving genetic variation, who were interested in conserving what we have left of the beauty of this planet. So I was interested in that from the time I was a kid. I grew up in, as a lot of people know who are watching this, I grew up in a town of about 700 people called Weippe, Idaho, in northern Idaho, known only if you've seen Ken Burns's documentary, The Corps of Discovery, because Lewis and Clark in The Corps of Discovery first encountered the Nez Perce Indians on the Weippe Prairie, in the place that was to become Weippe, Idaho. And it was there that the Nez Perce Indians saved the lives of Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery by feeding them salmon from the Clearwater River. The salmon was so rich that the members of the Corps would eat it, just engorge themselves on it, and then throw up and experience dysentery, and then start eating more because they were starving, having crossed the Rocky Mountains in what was at the time a relatively biologically depauperate area. So relatively little food. They were starving to death when they got to the Weippe Prairie and were saved. I suspect the Nez Perce tribe would have changed their mind about that if they had a chance later. But anyway, so I grew up in this small town. I was in the world. I was in the natural world every day. Every summer day, I was out playing in the stream that ran through town, Lolo Creek. I was out there playing in the woods. I was chasing snakes and seeing the natural world in what at the time was a beautiful condition. I grew up hunting and fishing with my mom and dad, going out every summer day to fish in the streams, and that's how we fed ourselves. We had a single income family. My dad was making very little money as a teacher, a public school teacher, and then a principal, and then a superintendent. And so we shot or caught most of our food. Deer, elk, lots of game birds, grouse, chukar, pheasants, so on, and lots of trout caught out of small streams in the summertime and then put in the freezer by my mom pretty much as soon as we got home. And that's what fed us all winter long, was the animals we shot or we caught. I didn't know any different. So I thought everybody in the world was getting along this way. I thought everybody had baking powder biscuits every night for dinner for a month because their mom messed up the finances, and so we had to eat the least expensive food possible for an entire month. I thought everybody was eating deer and elk, the occasional bear. I didn't know any different. And then I get to college and discovered that food can actually be really good, dorm food. And later, I discovered there was this thing called veganism and even vegetarianism, which was new to me. Vegetarianism? Are you kidding me? You don't even eat rainbow trout? How could that be? Lovely times. Difficult times as well. It's interesting, there are environmental studies majors and there are environmental science majors. And the first thing I would recommend is to run to the sciences and away from the studies, because studies can mean almost anything depending upon who's teaching the class. I was interested in studying women when I was an undergraduate, but we didn't even have a women's studies department, much less a curriculum. Similarly, environmental studies can mean almost anything depending upon the teacher who is teaching the material. That's why I would recommend pursuing sciences, because science is not just another way of viewing the world. Science conducted correctly leads to what is called reliable knowledge. And that reliable knowledge gives us an understanding of the universe and how it works. I can't imagine pursuing a degree today, having the opportunity to pursue a scientific, otherwise known as a rational approach, and not doing it. Instead, pursue something that sounds kind of the same, but is really very different. Environmental studies is not environmental science. If you're interested in a rational approach to understanding the world and the universe and the way the world and the universe work, then I would recommend pursuing a science degree of one kind or another. Environmental science, whatever. But most importantly, chuck all that aside for a minute. I would recommend doing what you love, pursuing what you love, whether it's in college or not. Because our time is short. Do what you love, do it well. In a culture of mediocrity, I would recommend the pursuit of excellence. Not because it will improve your material status in life, not because it will make you any money, but because it will allow you to live with integrity. And if there's anything more important than living with integrity, I haven't found it yet. There's a huge difference between excellence and perfection. We can all pursue excellence. Essentially, none of us will reach perfection. We can pursue perfection, knowing that we are never going to get there. That's called the pursuit of excellence. We make mistakes along the way. If you want a complete list, look at my life history. If you want to know what things to avoid, including walking away from a perfectly good, tenured, full professor position where I literally didn't have to do anything except teach the courses I want and pursue the research I want and advise the students I want to advise, well then, don't follow my route, obviously. So that was a huge mistake. I'm still interested in pursuing excellence. Perfection is a little beyond my grasp, as I've demonstrated repeatedly. Perfection is beyond the grasp of most, probably all of us. But excellence is not, and the pursuit of excellence doesn't mean that you're going to catch the damn thing. That's like the dog that chases after the car every time. The dog's not going to catch the car. You're not going to catch excellence, at least not all the time. That doesn't mean you shouldn't pursue it. Do the right thing. Do what is right. Pursue excellence. Do the best you can without hurting people. And the whole time maintaining your integrity. What else could be more important than that? If there is something, I don't know what it is.